Hey, Amanda.
Hi.
So before we get started, tell me a little about your background.
Well, I'm a musician. I started out as a kid being very, very into music and theater and always wanting to do both. And then in my mid-20s, I started a band called the Dresden Dolls and went off onto the great road of rock and roll and major labels and touring the world again and again and again, and making old-fashioned record albums and all that. And then in 2008, I went solo, and that sort of jettisoned me off into a sort of a DIY career where I really didn't want to work with a major label because I found that not working. I had really embraced the internet, especially like in the mid-2000s with my blog, and then with Twitter and all sorts of forums and social media. And I've basically been, I've spent the past few years for me have actually been very reflective, going like, oh my God, what just happened? In my path from being a street performer, which is what I was doing in my early 20s, to going the traditional band route, to trying to figure out how to just work directly with people on the internet to share my art and get paid. And that's sort of where I am now. Right now, I'm pregnant and about to just do like a baby project. So like, my brain is melting.
So I was talking earlier. So I was talking earlier to Zoe Keating about this, that you guys both have very independent views and very sort of control over your own music, but very different takes on how to monetize it. And, her as a classically trained cellist who gets used in TV shows, and you who started out, please put some money in this empty guitar case.
Yeah.
How has that informed what you expect technology to do for your music?
Well, I always look at technology as a friendly but suspicious tool, and so every time a platform has popped up to make things easier. When email showed up and when MySpace showed up and forums showed up, I embraced that because, I saw that email mailers were sort of taking the place of having to go down to Kinko's and make flyers and put them up on signposts and stuff. And as every platform has come and gone, I've just sort of migrated sort of like to where the people are. With Twitter sort of being a weird exception, which is I adopted Twitter pretty early, and I brought a lot of people into Twitter, and then Twitter sort of caught up and became sort of less of a clubhouse and more of a mainstream idea that people understood. But I've always approached every internet platform and every internet tool with the suspicion that it may not last. And that actually what's very important is that the art and the relationships that I'm building are authentic enough that even if the internet disappeared tomorrow, or even if Facebook collapsed, or Twitter collapsed, or what have you, or all of our email went down, I'm not so reliant on the internet itself that I couldn't somehow piece things together. And so I've always just been very slutty. And like, I'll use whatever is available to forward my agenda of connecting with people. But I will also, I also approach everything with a level of, skepticism. Right. That these things definitely will come and go, and they're not in my control.
So had you been an artist in the 70s or 80s, you'd be very dependent on someone sending you like a printed report each quarter for song sales, and that would be the end of it, really. Today, we have so much, with music as a service through streaming platforms, you get to see like a count of clicks and skips and all that kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. Is that better or worse for your relationship with your audience?
I don't look at it.
Really?
I mean, the funny thing about me is that I'm very nerdy in certain departments, and I really will analyze certain things, but other things I will just flat out ignore. And it's been really interesting watching my own evolution as like an artist with knowledge, and looking at iTunes versus YouTube counts versus you know, what people are discussing when they're discussing me on Twitter or when they're discussing me on Facebook, or where they're sharing their experience of what songs they love with other fans or with strangers. And one of the things, and it's funny, we were just in a session talking about this, you know, when you are forced as an artist, as most of us are, to basically market your own music and be your own brand and all that kind of thing, you can really get sucked down. You know, you get to sort of like choose your own rabbit hole that you're gonna chase. And I think, you know, I still put a lot of weight on the live experience. I love performing live, and I can sort of tell what resonates and what works when I'm in front of a bunch of people. And it's also very interesting to see what resonates and works on the internet. And, you know, I had kind of, I don't want to call it a throwaway song, but a sort of a very, you know, what felt like a small, unimportant song on a weird little, you know, side project record that I just happened to make into a music video because I just happened to be in an abandoned space with a filmmaker friend and said, hey, let's just like knock off a music video here. We're here today. It's this cool space.
Just lip synced it and then.
I just lip synced it with zero budget and zero script and zero plan. Right. And we just kind of fooled around for a couple of hours and he pasted it into a video. And that has become one of my most watched YouTube videos, which then means that that has become one of the most resonant songs with my fan base, right. Which means that when I play it live, everyone's heart goes pitter-pat. and I can't take YouTube and the fact that we had the technology to make a video on zero budget and just put it up for shits and giggles on the fly for granted.
Right.
And so I also try not to take Twitter for granted. I mean, I just wrote a whole book about how I wound up having success with crowdfunding. And it's very easy, I think, as people who use the internet to look back and sort of assume, especially, like, I mean, people here probably not, because people here are very smart and savvy. But it's very easy to look back and take all of these tools for granted. And that, like, oh, of course that had to have happened because, you know, email came along or Twitter came along. But when you actually sort of step back and start analyzing it, those things can really blow your mind, which is like, this wouldn't have happened, and this wouldn't have happened, and this wouldn't have happened.
In a lot of ways, the label, one of the things a publisher would do is give you a bag full of money so you could finish your work, and then you were sort of beholden to them, and you may never see another penny for a long period of time.
Right.
But they had this function of, I'm going to loan you the money up front,
right?
Get
a bank.
And now you've got crowdfunding coming along and saying you can test the popularity of your ideas, you can do all this stuff. You had tremendous success with that process.
Yeah.
That sort of was like the last nail in the coffin of the things that the labels and publishers did in many ways. Because now I can publish my stuff with CD Baby to all the services.
Right.
It can find roots, you know, on indie blogs and then show up in Shazam, which then drives its play on Spotify, which drives its sales and recommendation. Like, there's a whole sprawl.
Yeah.
And you can get the money up front with crowdfunding platforms if you've got some kind of following.
Yeah.
Do we still need publishers?
The unfortunate thing, and I have learned this being the kind of artist that I am, and especially the album that I put out through Kickstarter was, by all definitions, like the most like palatable, radio-friendly, really listenable, high-production record I'd ever made. And I did none of the major label things. I sort of like I took this leap of faith that, like, of course, if the production value is high and the songs are touching and amazing, and, you know, and the production is amazing and all these things, that it will now like magically float by itself because, you know, enough people have paid for it and are invested in it and will share the music, and it will magically make its way into, you know, not even make its way into the mainstream, but make its way into the world.
Yeah, sure.
And that wasn't really the way it worked. I really had to, and I've talked with plenty of other artists about that. The record was critically hailed, like, you know, 5 stars across the critical board, but I didn't have the machine working for me. And I kind of had to come to terms with the fact that the machine still feeds what people listen to. whether it's radio or what gets licensed to films or what music is playing when you walk into a shop. Like the ability of an artist to actually really like get over that mountain if you decide not to play the game is still, your hands are still pretty tied. Then again, you know, I actually got so much more control and to keep so much more money that you kind of, you know,
right.
It's like you want to have your cake and eat it too. Do you want total control and to be able to do this direct to fan thing, but sort of live off the grid? Or do you want to go live on the grid but have to compromise things and, you know, and sort of play this weird music industry game? And, you know,
is tech at least giving you the choice?
I mean, I think it's a more porous border, but it's still a border with guards.
Right.
Is sort of the way I look at it.
If you could get any data from the music you put out there, what data do you wish you could get back that you would look at?
I would love to know how many people have listened to the complete album.
It's like authors. I mean, I've seen books where I want to know, like we judge the number of highlighted comments that decrease dramatically as you go through the book as an indicator of whether they've actually read the book. Right?
Yeah, I would love to know. I would love to know something like that, and I would love to know, you know, I would love to actually. I would love to know when people, and this is just a very nerdy part of me, when people want to find out more about like Amanda Palmer's music, where do they go to look? Do they Google? Do they go to YouTube and put my name in? Do they go to iTunes? Do they, you know, go to my website and click on the music? Like, and that's, you know, those habits are a mystery to me. I know what I do. If someone tells me, oh, you've never heard so-and-so's music, you should definitely go check it out. I know the little shortcuts that I have to find, you know, where, and oftentimes it's just going to YouTube, especially because I want to see that person live.
Right.
And I want to see them actually play their music.
Do you think YouTube is a promotional platform, a discovery platform, or a distribution platform today?
Right now, I think it's both. I think it's wearing two hats.
I mean, Taylor Swift leaves her stuff on YouTube because it's promotional and takes it off Spotify, but YouTube is the largest source of revenue for India, for the music industry in India.
Yeah, I think Taylor Swift is out to lunch if she thinks that it's not both. And I think she probably knows it's both, but in her case, she needs to keep things kind of binary if she wants to make her simple argument.
Right.
But clearly, if Taylor Swift is on Vivo and Vivo is putting ads before Taylor Swift songs, she's making money.
Right.
So yes, it's promotional because, you know, it's free and her fans can go out and share her videos. But if she's also making money, you can't argue that it's strictly promotional because that would just be a lie.
So there's the immediacy with which we can find an album. I remember, I'm old enough to remember the day when I heard a song and then I'd sit next to the radio the next night with my finger sort of hanging over the record button, just hoping for that thing for the mixtape, and I didn't want to pause too soon, and then I'd get the next, and I'd like queue up the next song, and I'd be working on that perfect mixtape for a month. And today, someone says, "What do you think of this song?" I click on the link. Like there's a sense of I didn't have to work for that.
I feel it.
You know.
I feel it. I mean, I feel that in so many ways, especially like commitment to an artist when you go out and you buy the album because you heard the one song on or saw the one song on MTV, and you go, you know, you pedal your dirt bike to the mall and you go to Musicland and you find the tape and you shoplift it or you buy it or whatever. But then you have it and you want to listen to the whole thing.
Read the liner notes, you look behind it. Yeah.
And I mean, also, I mean, I used to do this thing, especially if I was covering songs, but even just as a fan, I would sit there with my record and the needle on the record and like write down song lyrics.
Oh yeah.
Because you couldn't find them anywhere, and if they didn't come with the vinyl, you had to like sit there and write them down. And you know, I feel very grumpy going like, oh, those were the good old days. But I feel like there was a level of commitment to the artist's output because it was so difficult to obtain And once you got the album, of course you were going to listen to the whole thing, because there was a scarcity and there was a limited number of records that you could pull off the shelf at any given time. And since you couldn't just skip through it, you know, you weren't going to get up like half a song into that and like go and like clean the record off and change it and put on another record. You were going to sit with that artist. And, you know, and you might decide like, I really only like side one, so I'm only going to listen to side one. But I wonder, you know, as I wonder with everything else happening to us in terms of what we will commit to, in what way and for how long, and how long can we sit with something, whether it's an article or a book or an artist, you know, what's gained and what's lost. And that to me is like, it's a quantity-quality dilemma. And you know, I still think of albums as really complete works of art. You know, I can't think about my favorite bands of the 80s and the 90s without thinking of these complete albums that to me were like worlds, you know, like entire books or like entire films that really sort of hung together and lived in one place. And Zoe and I were just talking about that. I mean, she's actually, you know, she was saying that an album for her is like she wants to kind of make it all at one time and make one big statement and put it out kind of like you would put out an opera. And I'm getting, you know, I'm deliberately trying to detach myself from that and just say like, you know, I wrote a song, I have this Patreon, I'm just gonna put it out. I'm just gonna put it out. And then at some point maybe I will collect everything together so that the mainstream media people of the world can have an Amanda Palmer record. But maybe that format really is dying, and I just have to.
A number of the people I've talked to said you used to buy an album, then we listen to the singles. Now we buy a single and we look at the Instagram or we look at the stubs or whatever. There's these subsets. So let me ask you one last question about taste making. So Rishi Malhotra at Savin says there's a lot of algorithms that will tell you what song you should play next. But he also says that, you know, there's a need for curation. Apple hired Zane Lowe to come in and sort of program stuff because he's such an influencer in music.
Right.
You talked about the industry and the game in the industry. You need to play the game so you get airtime so people find out who you are. But if an algorithm concludes that, you know, Amanda Palmer is the right thing to play after that song because that song is just perfect, maybe the right key and it's the right sentiment and people who stick around listening to it and so on, at some point the algorithm's going to be like, someone's going to rate an algorithm that's got to actually balance the best song and the one that's commercially viable that someone has payola in there, right? What do you think the future of this sort of weird human-machine playlist-generating robot is going to do to music?
I don't have an answer to that, but I do know that it's, you know, it's having been on the other end of the speakers listening to like the Dresden Dolls station on Pandora,
right,
and going like, ooh, yeah, no.
What's the worst match that you saw in there?
I'm not going to tell you, because
why would I do that to anyone? Huey Lewis
in
the News comes up and you're like, what? Yeah.
The funny thing is, Huey Lewis in the News, having been a huge influence on me, I'm not ashamed to say, in 1982 and 83, makes a lot more sense. Actually, it was more like 1986, because I was like 10.
Right.
Then that was like heavy duty MTV was my like church at which I worshipped, and that was just, you know, that was that time. And I feel like I owe more to Huey Lewis in the News and have more connection with Huey Lewis in the News than I do with some of these bands that the Dresden Dolls would get grouped with, where the music doesn't feel resonant, but because of certain
it's got the same
algorithmic
genome, right? Yeah.
things, it gets sort of tossed in there. And I go, you know, that's not really the way it works. That's not really the way art works. It's not really the way feelings work. And yes, like you can definitely say like, okay, like piano, minor key, chick singer, da 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 da. But I would love to believe, because I am, you can call me a pessimist or an optimist in this department, or you can call me a Luddite or whatever, but I would love to believe that there is a really big, important X factor that humans making machines cannot solve for. And you know, the same way I really don't want to live in a world where we agree that because, you know, Google can scan every great artwork in the world and generate wonderful new masterpieces for our walls and our museums, and like, why don't we just agree that that's not a good idea? And that we would rather have and that we would rather live in a world with a more organic process. Which is not to say that AI is not useful and machines are not useful and that math is not useful. But, you know, but where's the fucking romance in algorithming ourselves to death? That it just seems too scary.
Awesome. I think that probably should be the front cover of the report. Yeah, well done. Thank you so much.